we're going to do three things. We're going to define the war on consciousness, we're going to talk about who's doing it, and we're going to talk about the consequences. The war on consciousness is an intentional or unintentional obscuring of the debate, a debate that could be fairly easy and fairly simple for everyone to understand. Philosophers, pseudo-philosophers, scientists, and lay people. Everyone can understand these questions about consciousness because they all have access to it. This is the one currency in intellectual life that everyone has the same access to, which means no matter who you are, what you do, how good you are at doing things, whatever it is, all people have the same amount of experience and access to this concept of mental life. And so if that is allowed to be a universal, then nobody has power over anyone else. So the war on consciousness is promoting a materialist agenda. They're trying to say things like mind is the same as brain. They love to say neurons light up to show you what's going on in consciousness. Or my favorite, consciousness is the shadow of the mind itself, which means the mind is the thing, consciousness is merely an afterthought, a byproduct, a shadow. It's not a thing in itself. And so what the debate reveals, if you're allowed to even debate it, which you're not, the point that Gomez-Marin, my favorite physicist, is making is that this whole thing has been obscured on purpose and that the materialist agenda in science, and I don't know how much it's really in the laboratory. He is a scientist and he thinks it's everywhere, but it is pushing for this control, this language control and this thought control, which means they want to keep you from understanding that it's even a question. They simply want to say it is absolute that brain and consciousness are the same thing, which if you understand materialism, if you understand any of these threads, you realize, and Marin makes this point, that human beings to being robots. And you hear this every day with scientism, that human beings don't have free will, everything's mechanistic, a physicalist explanation reduces people to kind of a product of their simple physical makeup, which means your neurons create your consciousness. The things going on in your body are the extent of who you are. These kinds of things aren't really the debate. They are the absolutes that they are imposing upon you. The war on consciousness is people that are starting to see this. They're starting to see the consciousness as an open question. They're starting to see it for what it is, and they're starting to connect the dots that what might be called rampant capitalism, this is a political commentary, rampant capitalism can benefit from this particular obfuscation. I hate these big words, but I don't know where to go. So Dr. Marin makes the case, he actually uses the term capitalypse, which means we've gotten to a point where it's an apocalypse of capitalism. And because of this, there's a great reason for them to keep you from understanding social philosophy, which is what I'm saying this in. So the war on consciousness is the pushback against the scientific language control, what I call language game, over the consciousness debate. So who's doing it? That's part two. This is a lot more difficult. And the answer is we don't know who's doing it. And I think my depiction of the language game as being organic and non-intentional is probably a better explanation. And it means nobody's doing it. It means there aren't three dudes in a boardroom somewhere that really want to do this. Now, to some extent, each person that participates in scientism, each scientist or pseudoscientist or pseudo-philosopher that wants to participate on social media and social forums in day-to-day life and tell you these things in such a way that you can't respond. Well, you know this is true. Each single individual person who does that, in some sense, it's their fault. I get it, but this is not a simple question: who's responsible for scientism, and then this covering up of this universal thing that we call access to consciousness. So I do have to define that a little bit, and that is that what is the scariest for these people who, in my mind, don't know they're using it as their power and control. What is the scariest for them is the fact that the consciousness debate is the most universal of all ideas. So when you talk about how many lay people, how many of the masses, how many of people of varied, what we call intelligence, have access to certain ideas, religion's a big one. That pivots on this idea that certain people have access. And I think religion wants to be the thing where the most amount of people have the most amount of access. And it does that by dumbing down ideas. But in this particular case, this is a complex idea that is only universal because it's part and parcel of every one of our experience every day and every second of our lives, which means we all experience subjective mental life throughout our entire existence, whatever that existence is. We all do. which means we're experts, which means when we come to this debate, if we're freed from the hegemony of this language control, what everyone, those are some big words I'm throwing out there. If we get freed from that, we realize we're experts. So that's the definition. So who's doing it? We don't know. Is it organic? Are the language games organic? Is this control organic? I think it is. I think it comes from nowhere. And I think what happens is it's a system that is in fact organic, and people realize they can benefit from that system. And corporations, and political entities for sure. As a matter of fact, the rise of current politics in no part is people identifying these language games and using them to their benefit, but also shutting down people's ability to think for themselves. And that's a whole nother video. It's a whole nother process. So what is the war on consciousness? It is this covering up. Who's responsible? We don't know, but we do know that a lot of people are participating in it. And we call them scientists outside of science. We call it scientism. We call it pseudo-philosophy. So what are the consequences? The consequences are, if we let it continue, that here's a perfect example, that certain kinds of science and trends in science can potentially take over the planet to the extent that they do the damage we think they're doing, but because of this, not because of this. So AI is this huge system linked to something called transhumanism, which is the benefit for mankind of AI and and a transcending of humanity, a human transcending into a machine. So these ideas that AI is able to benefit us in some way and duplicate consciousness, because that's the scientism argument, is that AI is going to duplicate consciousness without really having an understanding of consciousness. Shh, don't talk about it. So what happens is that whole system is allowed to breed and consume our time and our energy, when we should be critiquing it, but critiquing it in the right way. So this is a perfect example. What is the consequence? That these scientific, more scientism debates in culture and society will overtake things because of a default, because people aren't thinking, they aren't pushing back, they aren't understanding that they have the ability, especially in this consciousness debate, which is linked to AI more so than anything else. You've got this rise in AI, and then you have this debate about consciousness, which the scientists are saying not important, not relevant, you don't know anything anyway. This understanding is flipped on its head because it's the thing you have the most control over, the thing you have the best understanding of, the thing that everyone can participate in. It's an equal structure that is the biggest threat to the hegemony of these big political, social, profit, maybe capital lips ideas that potentially are going to destroy everything because they're on the verge right now of destroying everything. And so you have this more humanist approach, which begins with understanding the universality of the consciousness debate. I hope this clears some of this stuff up. I've made so many videos. I haven't really put this out there, haven't really made it really clear what it is, who's doing it, and what could happen if we don't learn from it. There's your answer. There's going to be a lot of videos with some of these terms in them. So watch this video carefully and go on to my shorter videos. Thanks for coming, and don't eat pizza, eat like vegetables.